All right. Well, welcome everyone to our Wenatchee School continual learning keynote. So great to be here with everyone this morning. I am just a quick introduction of who I am. You can see I wanted to join you in Wenatchee, so I got a virtual background here. I'm in Wenatchee with you. And my name is Jeff Udick. I'm originally from Spokane, Washington. And I have had I guess, I don't know how you would put this. I guess I've been lucky in some ways in that for 10 years, I got to teach overseas at international schools. On the other side of that, this is my fourth time supporting schools in a virtual continual education, distance learning kind of situation. My wife's a school counselor. And we were in Saudi Arabia for 3 years, which we were closed and had to do a distance learning to help graduate our seniors due to terrorism attacks in the country at the time. We then moved to Shanghai, China, where because of SARS, we had to do distance learning. And then we moved to Bangkok, and because of flooding and H1N1, had to do distance learning there as well. And so because of that experience, there's a couple things that have come out of it. The technology keeps changing. And so we're going to talk about what does that look like today, and what are some things that we know we can do for schools. So that's number one. Number two is, with me having a lot of contacts in international schools, we know that Asia and a lot of the American international schools, so schools much like where you teach, just happen to be in Shanghai or in Hong Kong or in Thailand or other places of Asia, are now 9 or 10 weeks into distance learning. And so we are getting a lot of information about what is working and what is not working from those schools. And so that's what we're going to focus on today. Is this isn't just my understanding of what works, but it's also what we are hearing is working with other schools who have been ahead of us in this situation. So that's where we're going to go. I'm going to go ahead and start the presentation. Again, if you would like to follow along with the presentation on your own screen and do some kind of split screen at home, if you have it, there is a link to the presentation in the description of this YouTube video. So if you click on the show more button, you'll see a link there, and you too can then see your presentation while you follow along here. So here's where we're going to start this morning. And the first thing I want us to just understand is this idea that we're never going to stop learning, right? This is an exciting time. And I think it's an exciting time for us to really ramp up our own professional development and think differently about education. And there's a lot of articles that are coming out now that, this is a time and place for education to really rethink what it means for teaching and learning to happen in 2020 and beyond. And I think that's really kind of the mindset we need to take with this. Is we can get very wrapped up in the negative side of all of this, but I really want us to focus on, what's the positive side of this as well. And what does this look like? Oops, sorry about that. So where we're going to start is start with kind of this hierarchy of understandings. And this actually was shared on Twitter by Jay Dostal, who shared this on Twitter. And I think it really starts to boil down where we are when we talk about continual education with our students. Is we have to look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs and really understand that before we ever think about school, that there are a lot of other needs we must meet for our community, for our parents, and for our students. And so that starts with making sure that our students are psychologically okay, that there are a lot of safety concerns still going on, and making sure that all of these are actually met. And what we're going to focus on is a way that we understand that schools are a huge part of that. The relationships that you have with your students is a huge part of that. And so part of doing distance learning or continual learning with students is giving time to focus on the psychological and safety needs of our students and our families. And so we have to start there before we can ever kind of ramp into the idea of doing school differently and what that means. But I wanted to start with what we know doesn't work. And what we know doesn't work is coming a lot out of, as these Asian schools, these American schools in Asia have again been in this 8 or 9 weeks. And here are things that we know don't work. We know that expecting learning on day one doesn't work. There are way too many those psychological needs, those safety needs that we have to help parents and students through. We know that it takes a family roughly 3 weeks to kind of get settled. So it's about a 3-week process to, even as a family who is now doing, is now living at home, it takes them about 3 weeks to get settled. And so our timeline needs to very much follow that idea. So we can't expect learning on day one. The second thing we know is digital worksheets are getting a lot of pushback. And you've probably read some news articles where parents are even starting to push back on this idea of digital worksheets as well, because of the just overwhelming packets that people are sending home. Digital worksheets don't work. Worksheets were never really a good educational way of learning, and digital worksheets are actually worse. So we just have to think differently, and that's really what we're going to talk about. And what we also know is doing what you were going to do anyways doesn't work. Your curriculum was not made for a pandemic. What you were going to do face to face with your students, what you were going to do in the classroom where you had time with kids, no longer is going to work. And that's probably one of the worst things that we are seeing schools do, is pretend nothing's changed and trying to continue on with school exactly like it was before this happened. And that's the worst thing you can do. We are putting so much pressure on students. We're putting pressure on family when we try to do that. And we're trying to take a curriculum that was never made to go online, a curriculum that was never made for some students to be connected, some students not to be connected, and trying to use that. And that we have to really think about. And so this is where we have to rethink the idea of education. We have to rethink, what does it mean to be a teacher today in this world, in our current reality? So what I really hope is I hope that at some level that you understand that you have been unleashed from your curriculum that you might have found to be too rigid, and state tests that have put too much pressure on you and your students. You've been unleashed to rethink what education can look like in this crisis. And on some level, I hope that excites you. We need to understand that maybe for the first time in quite a while, we have been unleashed to think differently. We have been unleashed to do the projects that you never had time to do. We've been unleashed to take control and take this access to information that we have available, that we walk around in our pockets, and use it with our students. And that's where we have to start. We have to start understanding that from now on, one of the questions you're going to hear throughout this presentation that we need to keep asking ourselves is, how do I use the world as my curriculum? Because that's really the power that we have now. Is the curriculum is not in a book. The curriculum is not something that the district bought for you. It is now the world and everything the world has to offer. And so here's what we're planning, and here's what we have other schools here in the state of Washington. And I am very proud to say that from a lot of the conversations I'm having with other consultants around the United States and other consultants in other parts of the world, that here in the state of Washington, we are doing a really good job of leading this. We were one of the first states to go into a distance learning scenario, and we are really starting to lead the way in what does that look like in impacting student learning. We don't have all the answers yet, but we do know what is working. And one thing that we know is working is this idea of slowly rolling out what it is to go into a distance learning or continued learning system. And what school districts are having a lot of success with is this kind of 3-week rollout system. So for you here in Wenatchee, this is what it's going to look like. Week 2, which is this week, this is the start of your week 2, is creating your system, right? And we're going to go through each one of these week and what does that mean for you as a teacher and what are our expectations for students. But this week really is about you setting up your continual education system. So this week's about you and a lot of professional development that you're going to be involved in through the district to help you create your system of learning for students. Then next week, we're going to be preparing for learning. And this is where we start to ramp it up. We start making sure that we have engagement from students, that we make sure that we've reached out to all of our kids. We make sure we know where each of our students are and we're ready to go. And then in week 4, the learning begins. And that is where we will see new learning, new material start to be rolled out through our new system. So that's how this is going to break down for you here in Wenatchee over the next 3 weeks. It's slow. We're trying to make sure we're meeting those lower needs of our students and our parents and our community before we ever get to a place where we expect new learning to happen. And you have to be thinking about that this is like first day of school all over again. We have to set up new routines. We're setting up new systems. Just like on the first day of school, you're teaching students how to turn in assignments. We're doing that again, just in a new virtual way. So if we break this down, we're going to start with week one here. And week one, or week two for you actually, is creating your system, right? And the system that we're setting up at Wenatchee looks like this: is your home base. And I like to use the word home base with students. Your home base is going to be Google Classroom, or if you are a K2 teacher, it's going to be Class Dojo. The home base becomes critical because everything needs to go through the home base. And we need to start training students that Google Classroom or Class Dojo is where all our communication goes. We need to start training students and parents that we don't want a flood of emails, right? We're trying to rechange habit around this idea that email is a way that you communicate everything to a teacher. Email is fantastic and it has a place, but we want learning focused to be in our home based. So if you have a link to send out to students, if you have things you want students to do, everything should be in Google Classroom, or if you're K-12, in home base. On top of that then is really starting to look at the power that is allowed through the Google suite of tools. And I put the icon here for Google Drive at the bottom. And Google Drive really is what runs Google Classroom, right? It's Google Drive, and Google Classroom is kind of this layer that sits on top of Google Drive, but it's Google Drive that really is the power to learning this way. Now, the two icons on the left and the right that have the little video icon in the middle become critical in a continual learning situation. And they both play very important but different roles. The one on your left, the green one, is Google Meets. And Google Meets is what we use for synchronous conversation. So much like we're doing here, where we are live with other people, this is what you're going to be using to set up an office hour. And we're going to talk more about that. This is probably what you're going to be using, and hopefully you're using to have virtual meetings as a staff. And it becomes a critical part to the distance learning ecosystem. The other app is called Screencastify, and that's the arrow, kind of orangish yellow arrow. It's called Screencastify. And Screencastify is a app that allows you to create video and then turn it in as a student, or create video and send out video instructions as a teacher. And it's your asynchronous video tool. And it also becomes very powerful. Now, down in the bottom left-hand corner is Flipgrid. And Flipgrid is one of my favorite apps. If I was a K2 teacher, it would probably be one of the first tools I would introduce to my students outside of Class Dojo. But I have seen it used incredibly K through 12. And it's a tool that's going to be there for you, but I'm going to highly recommend that is a tool that maybe we add in week 5, 6, 7, once we have these 4 core tools solidified for students and their learning. But that's what our ecosystem is going to look like. So Google Classroom is your home base. Google Drive is where we're going to get most of our work done. We're going to be using Google Meets for our synchronous video, and we're going to be using Screencastify for our asynchronous video, right? And then Flipgrid is another great tool that's going to kind of oversee that entire thing as well. So other things you're working on this week is rethinking, what does it mean to teach? And one of the things that I'm loving about this is that for the first time in a long time, we get to rethink school. We are not stuck in 1-hour periods in middle school and high school. We're not stuck to whatever schedule you have in the elementary school. We get to rethink what is possible. And one of those things I want you to kind of start thinking about is you are no longer teaching periods of students. You're teaching them all at the same time. So we have some teachers here in the state of Washington that instead of making a Google Classroom for period 1, period 2, and period 3, they're making one Google Classroom for all of the students. Because in school, you only have 30 students because that's what our class sizes are. But in a continual learning situation or distance learning situation, you could be having 120 kids all collaborating at the same time, learning from each other. If you set up a discussion, let's say you set up a discussion in your Google Classroom, students in period 4 who never got to talk to students in period 1, all of a sudden get to interact with each other. So we can start thinking about the way that we structure this does not need to be and should not look like your school day. We have to take advantage of this idea of we've been unleashed. We've been unleashed from those confines of a school. And so what that looks like is up to you, right? But be thinking about, is it okay that my 8th grade algebra class gets to work with my 6th grade math class and they could be in the same Google Classroom? Would it be okay if some 8th grade questions about algebra are being seen by 6th grade students? Is it okay that a 6th grade student maybe posts a question and it's answered by an 8th grader? So I'm not even talking about the same subject area. I'm talking about all the students that you happen to teach, regardless of subject area, if it makes sense. So we have to rethink that we are teaching students all at once. You are now teaching 120 students, not 6 periods a day. And I want you to kind of think about what are the possibilities around that. The other thing that we know is being very successful is the idea of setting up office hours. Having synchronous communication with your students is showing to be a critical part of this distance learning or continual learning situation that we're in. What we also know is we cannot and should not require students to show up in a synchronous way. We need to make it available to them. So what we're recommending is that you are setting up office hours. So these are 1-hour sessions, roughly 1-hour sessions, 2 or 3 times a week for the synchronous conversation between you and your students. And here's the great part. Here's what teachers who have already started doing this are finding out. When students are coming to these office hour synchronous conversations with their teacher, they're not talking about the assignment. They're not talking about doing the work. This is where you build those relationships. This is where you get to check in with students. How are you doing? How are your parents? How are things going for you? Kids just want to talk to other kids. These 1-hour office hours are a critical point to keep those relationships that we know are the foundation of good teaching and learning for our students. It's one of the best parts of this is having the opportunity to have these office hours with our students and stay connected with them. Now, as you get into this, say we're in week 4, 5, and 6, those office hours start to turn to be more about questions that students might have, focused on, content and things that you might be doing. But at the same time, it's still about relationships, especially in the early goings. If you have not synchronously seen your class for 2 or 3 weeks now, your first couple office hours are just going to be about kids seeing their teacher because they love you and they want to see you. The other thing is we need to understand that not every family is going to have the same availability to technology. So not only are we going to be holding office hours, but the idea that you need to change the office hours around. For example, you should not hold your same office hours at 10 a.m. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Because if there are students who don't have access to a computer for whatever reason at 10 a.m., they never get to join. So what we're recommending is that maybe on Monday it's at 10 a.m., maybe on Wednesday it's at 1:30, and maybe on Friday it's at 2:30 to 3:30, or whatever is right for you. And as schools, as teachers, as departments, you will need to come up with what is right for you so that we try not to overlap too much. There's going to be overlap. And what you'll find is in these office hours is kids might pop into you for 15 minutes and then they'll go pop into another teacher that might be holding an office hour at the same time for 15 minutes. And that's okay. It's about connecting. It's about allowing students to show up and be there with you. So that becomes a critical part. And in this first week, that is part of creating your system. When are you going to be holding your office hours? Can you start getting that information out through your Google Classroom, through Class Dojo, of what your office hours are going to look like? In week 2, you will be holding your office hours, right? So what could some assignments look like this week as we kind of get set up? One of the first things that we kind of want to have as an assignment, if you will, is to help families understand that they need to be setting up some kind of home learning space. And teachers are doing this in different ways. Teachers are doing this by having students take a photo. Students are just asking parents to help their kid come up with a learning space and what that might look like. Your goal this week is to get familiar with Classroom, Screencastify, Drive, and Google Meet. And I know the district's going to be holding trainings on those all week. So make sure that you're familiar with those, understand how they all work together to create this new system of learning that we are creating. And then understand that Google Classroom is our home base. And again, one of the things we need, I keep driving that home because it becomes so important. And make sure you have directions in your Google Classroom of, I will have, directions, or the assignment or whatever it is will be posted by X time every day, every week, or whatever that looks like. Because here's the first thing that we're knowing that we're hearing from parents is parents and students are getting overwhelmed with the number of notifications that are coming from Google Classroom. Every single time a teacher posts something to Google Classroom, the parent and the student gets an email notification. And if you have 7 classes and teachers are posting 3 or 4 times a day, your inbox is completely overwhelmed and you don't know what to pay attention to. So what we need to do is we need to set up a time. What families need in times of crisis like this is something concrete that they can rely on. And one of those things that should be concrete that they can rely on is the idea that my teacher tells me that the directions or the assignment is going to be posted every Monday at 9 a.m. And then it is posted every Monday at 9 a.m. That does not mean, teachers, that you work on it Sunday night at 10 p.m. and say, oh, I'll just post it now. That doesn't work, because as soon as you post it, even if it's Sunday night at 10 p.m., that notification is going out. So understanding in Google Classroom, you can schedule things. So you can be working on it Sunday night, but then you're going to schedule that post to actually go live at 9 a.m. Monday morning. And again, there will be PD to help you if you don't know how to schedule a post. That is something that we can get you some PD on in order to do that. But it becomes critical that we try to keep the amount of times that we're posting in a Google Classroom to a minimum so we can stay focused on what is important. So we're talking that a teacher should probably only be posting something in their Google Classroom 2 or 3 times a week. And everybody should know what time to expect that assignment or those directions to be coming out. Also in week 1, it's time to create your system. And what does that look like, right? So again, if we're outside the confines of school, we can now rethink what teaching and learning looks like. And these are some, again, a lot of this is coming from schools that are ahead of us, is we are hearing both from teachers and from students that in the middle school and high school, they are liking a system where they get a longer time to focus, especially students. A lot of student feedback has been, I like the idea that I'm just focusing on ELA and science today. I'm not trying to do 1 hour of 7 classes, but it also means we can go more in depth. We can change the assignment. It also means you don't have to give an assignment. If I'm an ELA teacher, I do not need an assignment for Monday and an assignment for Tuesday. You might be able to create some kind of project, create something that maybe is going to last 2 days. So we have this flexibility of time. And so on the screen that you're looking at now is just a recommendation, and different school districts are taking this and turning this different ways, making what works for you. But the idea that you would have ELA and science on Mondays and Tuesdays, math and social studies on Wednesday and Thursday, and then Friday being electives, CTE courses, PE. Some school districts are saying that PE is outside of this, and it should be family PE time to help families get out and exercise. I have another school district that I'm working with that has reading. We know we want students to read, and we want them to read a lot. And so they're outside of this is family read time, where the whole family should take 30 minutes to sit down and read. Mom, dad, kids, can we just carve out 30 minutes as a family and have read time in this crisis mode as well? So we can rethink some of the ways that this schedule might look like. If you're in an elementary school, the elementary schedule looks very similar as well. As all of a sudden we can take this and we have to slow this down. We have to understand that what we are seeing right now is the kids are doing about 1/3 of what you would expect them to do when they were in front of you. So think about that. We're seeing about 1/3. So take whatever you were going to do in your hour or 45-minute lesson, and you've got to chunk that down into about 1/3 the time. That's kind of what we're seeing. So even in the elementary, being able to say like, hey, Monday is our reading writing day. Tuesday is just math. Wednesday is just science. Thursday is just social studies. And Friday is our specials or our 20% time and music and whatever else that you might need to have there. So we are finding that even at an elementary, you're helping parents and you're helping students by being able to break this down and slow it down. So be thinking about what that schedule might look like for you and for your students. Now, on top of this, we also, because we have the world as our curriculum, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, is you might be able to make some amazing interdisciplinary project that spans everything. And what we're really excited about, or what I'm really excited about, and if I flip back to this slide, is even in the middle school and high school, one of the reasons why I like this schedule is it allows some of the content areas to overlap. And if you work together, create an interdisciplinary project that might include ELA and social studies teams working together, science and math teams working together. So if you can create some kind of big project-based learning idea where the science and math curriculum or the science and math standards are being met at the same time, then kids would be involved in that all 4 days. Right. And the same thing for ELA and social studies, which is why I don't want ELA and social studies on the same day and math and science on the same day. We also know that there are some kids who ELA or social studies, the idea of writing is their jam. We know that there are other kids that the idea of science, mathematics is their jam. So we want to try to change those up so that every day, hopefully there's something that that brain can connect to. All right. And then so to kind of wrap this up for week one, this week, this is what you're focused on. Team meetings are critical. Hopefully you've already been holding team meetings. We need to support each other as educators. Hopefully you're, either department meetings or team meetings. You're holding staff meetings. Check in with each other, schedule those times, make sure those times are the times that we need, right? Meet at least twice a week to get started as a team, and then support each other the best you can. Now, before we go on to week two, I'm just going to stop here because I haven't seen the chat. And I'm going to ask Ron, are there any questions that are coming up about kind of that idea of what to expect this week?
Yeah,
Ron?
we got a few questions, Jeff, that I'd love you to be able to facilitate. I think two of them I can facilitate, but we need a couple answers from you.
Okay.
A lot of questions around, is Google Meet going to be available K-12? Cabinet discussed that this morning, just for you guys as information. In terms of office hours, once we get routines in place, we will be turning that on. And for the smaller students, that's where you got to have some guidance for parents, because they're going to be helping their students in that facilitated process to start with until everybody gets used to that way of working. So you get that routine established, as Jeff said, you get your office hours in place, and we will have the ability for those students to join those meets. We do not want to record student meets. That's a privacy issue. We do a lot of recording of our staff meetings, but at this point, we're not going to be recording student meetings. We'll discuss that in the future if we need to come back to that. But for now, I think that's a safer approach for privacy, unless Jeff has a different opinion on that one.
No, and I think that that's the way that most school districts are doing it. If teachers are worried about maybe holding up an office hour and one student shows up, either get somebody else in your house to sit with you, a spouse sitting in the background or a loved one sitting in the background, somebody else, or ask the student if their mom or dad could join them. And again, you can just be like, hey, I just want to check in. But again, if that is a concern that you're having, there's a way to either protect yourself by having somebody else in your house that you might be in your house with you, or ask the student to invite that one of their family members to sit in on the call as well.
Yeah, we want to create that safe space and everybody feels safe. This is a new world for everyone. So we gotta tread as lightly as we can with as much information as we can with our parent community. Another question that popped up, Jeff, you had mentioned really teaching all your kids all at once. And there's a lot of teachers that have Google Classrooms established by period. So are you suggesting they merge those, or do they keep that structure and share those assignments out to multiple classrooms? How do you think they handle that?
That's a really good question. It's a question we'd asked a lot. And I would say it's totally up to you. This is where you get freedom as a teacher. I would say if you've already been using Google Classroom and you have that structure in place, maybe stick with that structure, but be thinking about ways that you can have kids collaborate across time and space. We talk about collaboration being one of the 21st century skills, even though we're in 2020. But the change that it actually means, right? We want kids to collaborate, but it's not just collaborate. We need to teach kids, how do you collaborate across time and space? What an amazing time period to help focus on that. Because we know outside of this crisis, knowing how to communicate somebody over a meeting like this, knowing how to work on a document with somebody you don't see, is a critical skill for our workforce today. So maybe if you already have your classroom set up by periods, maybe leave them that way. But are you going to have students in period 1 are also going to be writing with students in period 3? Right? What would that look like? Can you have 2 different classes working on the same presentation? I think there's just ways that we can even think. If you've already got that structure set up, I don't want you, and kids are used to that structure, maybe leave that structure, right? But then think about, how do you use this flexibility? Right? Like, you have to almost think the time space continuum has been blown apart. I mean, it's the way I like to think about it, is there is no time space continuum anymore. And so we have this freedom to kind of think differently about what does teaching and learning look like.
Okay, so there's a lot of them around Google Classroom, Screencastify, and uh, just tune into trainings this week. We're going to scaffold back and use Jeff's presentation as a framework for the way Ray and I will be presenting trainings the rest of the week. We have lots of Google Meet trainings tomorrow. We got Screencastify trainings, using video in the classroom training. So tune into those trainings, and we'll try to get some questions answered during that time, because there's a lot of small detail questions around the actual apps themselves, but we'll handle those as best we can. I think for this section, though, just maybe one more clarification. There's a few questions around middle school and high school multiple classes. When you made your recommendation of the schedule and what that could look like, in reading these questions, there's still a little confusion on how does that work when there's so many different class choices. They got algebra and they got geometry and they got all these different things. So are you just saying, if science is one day, that's what we do? It's biology, it's chemistry, it's physics, it's whatever else that secondary student might have on that particular day.
Yeah. And that's kind of the idea, right? Whatever that student would have on that day would be where they would be able to focus on that. The other thing is when you're holding office hours, and if I just go back to this slide, and I'll use the middle school, high school one as a kind of a schedule as an idea here. But if I'm an ELA teacher, I'm going to hold my office hours on Monday and Tuesday, right? And my office hours match up with the day that students should be working on my subject area. And again, even as a teacher, I don't want teachers to be holding 7 different office hours because you teach 7 different classes. That's not what this is. It's 1 hour where students get to drop into you. And we've never seen 120 students show up. If you can get half of your students to show up and you get to break Google Meet, that would be awesome. And then we can think about something. But we're talking about what most teachers are saying is maybe 20 kids show up, per time. And so, I know we tried to think like, oh my gosh, all my kids are going to be there. We haven't had a teacher say that I've got 100% of my kids. And if you do get that, congratulations, that would be fantastic. And then we can solve that problem once that problem becomes a problem. But what we're really seeing is like somewhere between 15 and 20 kids, and again, you're having a conversation. And if I'm teaching math and I'm also teaching science, and there's this math problem first, the kid, there's ways to think about this as well. And it's good for everybody.
Okay, so I think that's our last one that really, for the good of the order, I think I'll let you continue. Just know that anybody watching, we're going to tally all these questions. We're writing everything down from the chat. Those will all be available. We'll either handle them in the Q&A after Jeff's done with his presentation, or we will communicate the answers back out to you through an FAQ or some other way.
Prepare learning and what that might look like. So week 2, this is your next week for you. So the week of, the week of, I think April 13th is Monday. And so here's what we're looking at for next week is you want to start having students engage. And the whole idea about week 2 is the idea of engagement. How do I make sure I'm getting kids engaged, right? Because we have to engage kids before we worry about new learning to happen. So this might be a week where you start reviewing the material that you did before school closed, right? So this might be a review. If you've already been using a tool like quizzes or Kahoot or one of those kind of tools before this would be a great week to maybe just get that out there, have kids review in some way. You're going to make a video for students. So you screencastify and just say, hey kids, still good to see you. Glad that we're going to get back into school. So I want you to be making a video using Screencastify so students hear from you. And the first video that you make from students, right, is you have to think about that we're in those lower levels of Maslow's hierarchy. So the first time you make a video for students, you're not going to jump into the learning lesson. You're going to be telling students about, hey, I hope everything is going well for you and your family. Everything's going well here for me. It's a time to build relationships with your students. So let's say that you have a dog named Fluffy that you're always talking about in your classroom. All of a sudden you get to show kids your dog named Fluffy, right? Or maybe you're always talking about your spouse or your kids in your classroom. Bring them in. If you're comfortable with that, help kids understand that you're going through this too. If you've set up some kind of home office where you're working from, show students your home office, because in week 1, you wanted them to make a home office. So you're maybe going to take your camera and you're going to walk around and be like, here's my home office, and here's the situation that my family is living in. That's your video. Your video is building that relationship with your students, showing them that you're in this same situation that they. You're going to be holding your first Google office hour week. You also make sure we're reaching out to students, and you can email students you haven't heard from. So by next week, if there is a student who has not engaged in your Google Classroom, who nobody in the district has heard from, Susie, then we need to find a way to reach out to those people. We all know that school is going on. Not all families might be aware that we're ready to ramp up school again. So there might be a phone call. We might have to email them. We have to try and reach out to families any way we can. Yeah.
Just you're kind of cutting out a few times. We've had a few little spots of freezing. Not sure on your upload speed. Maybe pop your camera off, do some audio for a bit, and we'll see if it stabilizes.
All right, let me see here. Let me just check and see what my live stream is saying here.
Yeah, you're good right this second, but it was freezing a little bit there. So
yep. Okay. So it says it's
just kind of FYI.
Okay, cool. Well, we'll keep going.
Yeah, maybe just turning your camera off to save a little bit of bandwidth. That's about the best we can do for now. But
okay,
welcome to online learning, right?
Yeah. Hey, it's what we do.
Internet's critical.
Yeah. I'll stop my video for just a little bit. We'll see how that works. Is that working? Does that seem better? Or does it stop everything?
That's what I'm afraid of.
Is it still showing my screen?
Yeah, still see your screen.
Okay. Well, that's good. And we'll go this way.
Okay.
So that's week 2. So week 2 is very short. The idea of, we're just getting prepared for the learning and understanding that new learning will then start in week 3. All right. So then in week 3, this is where we're going to be rolling out that new learning begins. So we've had a week where we've done some review. Where were we when we started? And now we're going to actually ramp this up and have new learning begin, right? So a couple questions I just like teachers to be asking themselves, right? How am I taking advantage of my new reality? How are you thinking differently about some of the ways that you are handing out lessons, what those different lessons might look like because of the new reality we live in. Again, be thinking to myself, how am I using the world as my curriculum? Right? How am I using real world scenarios in my teaching? This is one of the critical things that we've seen is we always talk about that we are teaching kids to do things for real world purposes. And if we're teaching kids to do things for real world scenarios or real world purposes, this is your opportunity. Kids are stuck in the real world. So are we using these real world scenarios for my teaching? If I'm teaching fractions, am I having students bake? If I'm teaching science, am I having kids look for scientific things at their home or be able to discover things that are out there in the world? So we're going to talk about some ways that teachers are doing this already. How can I have students collaborate across time and space? We talked about that a little bit. And then the last bullet point here is this idea of video, video, video. We need to understand that for better or for worse, the number one piece of technology that most people are going to have in their homes is a video camera. There is a video camera on every laptop. There's a video camera on every phone. So if you are a family and you have 3 cell phones, that's 3 video cameras. We have to rethink of what teaching and learning is going to look like when maybe students are going to be handing in their assignments via video. And this is something that we were talking about and we were moving to before this crisis hit. The power of video in both teachers giving out directions and students turning in their work is a critical piece of technology that really enhances the learning. So for math, for example, I'm not going to have students turn in a worksheet of them solving math problems. I'm going to have them turn in a video of solving one math problem. Because when they turn in a video of solving one math problem, I get to hear the student as they solve the problem. And hearing the student as they're going through the math problem is where I get to find any misconceptions. Right? We call it math talk. It's actually research around this idea. And it's not just math. That's just an easy example. So I want us to be thinking about, and even this idea of doing large interdisciplinary projects, right, that incorporate as many subjects at the same time. What does that look like? So we just have to think differently about even the learning assignments that we give to students, right? And I just want us to remember that whatever you had in your curriculums were not created for pandemics. That we don't have anything. You have been unleashed to think differently about what you want students to do. Our standards are what we need to focus on. And I have one school district that is actually asking teachers to answer the question, 10 years from now, what do I want students to remember about my class? And whatever your answer is to that question, that's the focus. That's what you focus on for these next few weeks as we find ourselves in a distance learning situation, right? So I wanted to share with you then some ideas here of other teachers that are doing things. And all of these, of course, are in the presentation, so you can go and watch them. This is Shannon, Mrs. Cunningham. She is a 4th grade teacher from Enumclaw, Washington. And she started her first day, much like they're using very much the same system that we are talking about rolling out here in Wenatchee. And this is her first day video where she is in her pajamas with her cup of coffee. And she is talking to her students for the first time. She used Screencastify to create this video. And so just an example of a teacher. And here's what we know is teachers don't like to look at themselves in the camera, but your kids look at you every single day and they love you. And making videos is not about being perfect. It's about being you. And that becomes such a critical part. And I've actually got links for you around the research that shows that kids want you to be you and what that looks like. So Shannon, I wanted to show you some of the things that Shannon has done. And again, this is Shannon here. She's a 4th grade teacher. So I thought I'd start at elementary and show you some examples. She went the interdisciplinary route, and she created a virtual learning for her students that was a build the fort challenge, right? So she had her students build forts at their house out of pillows and blankets and cushions off of the couch, whatever they had around them. And at the same time, they were doing math. She had them measure the perimeter of their fort. She had them write directions so that somebody else could build their fort. She had them take photos of their fort. And then she had them, for social studies, she had them go and research a fort in the state of Washington. And so, but I love this idea of thinking about what was it that I loved to do as a student and what was the learning behind it. And how could I have students do that? So she used a build fort challenge, and she had she had the students send in some of the pictures. This is the task of what it looked like in her Google Classroom. So this is her build a fort challenge task. Right, you're not allowed to buy anything to build your fort. You have to just be able to use information that you have around your house. You can see it's just one update. She updates her class every Monday at 9 a.m. is the one thing that she sends out to her students. All of the Google Docs that students would need to finish this would be there for them in that one update. Right. Another thing that we've seen is we know that not every student is going to be able to have access for whatever the reason is. Instead of sending home a bunch of worksheets, again, we want real world examples of what students could do. So this is a choice grid, and this was one that was created by an ELA teacher, a high school ELA teacher out of Sunnyside. And I love this idea of we want kids, especially at the high school, to write. We want them to think. And so he has taken these idea of these five I guess, areas: connection, purpose and passion, wellness, reading and writing, and is giving kids a choice grid. And you'll notice in the directions, the parent or guardian just needs to initial when you did it. But I love the idea of like, call someone you haven't talked to in a while, right? Spend 1 hour outside away from technology, watch a TED talk about a topic you're interested in, read 100 pages of a book. I just love this idea of giving kids choice that are tied to real world reading and writing. Think about it. I know we have students, especially at the high school, we feel like we have to read certain, whether it's Shakespeare or whatever the books are, and we're not going to have that opportunity. But what is it? Why do we read those books? Why do we read Shakespeare? And what is the actual learning we want students to get out of that? And is there some other way that we can meet that learning outcome when not every student has Shakespeare in front of them, right? This is another teacher. This one happens to be from Luxembourg, that I was actually at the International School of Luxembourg, which is an American international school in the country of Luxembourg. When the COVID crisis hit, and my wife and I had to try to get back here before they closed the airports down and whatnot. But this is a French teacher who is still having her students study French culture. So I'm not going to play the video for you. You can play it for yourself. She actually has a green screen at home. The link down at the bottom of this, you can actually see her improve. And what I love is, like, you watch her first video and she's like, half her face is off the screen. She's trying to figure out her system. But I even put here what she wrote to me is that she takes her videos and she puts them inside a Google form, and she's asking students to try to answer questions about the video. So she's actually going around to all of the French speaking countries in the world, and then having kids do learning activities around that. So she's still meeting her cultural outcome. She's still getting kids to engage with the language in a fun and different way. Right. Another thing to be thinking about is, how do we keep track of all of this? And so this is probably one of my favorite ideas that I've seen. Is this was shared on Twitter, and again, there's a link at the bottom of this where you can go and make one of these for yourself. But this is just a Google Sheet where you would share this Google Sheet with your students. And so I'm thinking that this would be really good for, say, 3rd grade, probably through 12th grade, where the students now are in control. And so you would set up a Google Sheet. You would make the students an editor of that Google Sheet. And then the students get to tell you what they are working on, what they have finished. Because the idea of having a due date is non-existent anymore. We have to be very flexible with due dates. But having some kind of system where you can track, and especially if you're going to give students choice, to allow them to choose, okay, well, this week I feel like working on this week I feel like working on that. You can see here that students are able to tell you what they are working on. I think this is an amazing way to set up a a system of assessment, a system to keep track of where students are, where they're working, how they're feeling about different assignments. Ask your students if the work you're giving them is too much or too little is critical as well as we go through this. And the link again at the bottom, you can make a copy of this sheet. The teacher has shared it open source for you so that you can start using it. And there's also videos there where they will tell you how to maybe change some of the things to make it even more customized. Again, something great to be thinking about here in this week as we set up our systems. The other thing I want you to remember too is that there are other amazing platforms out there. And the one that I wanted to highlight was Google Earth. If you haven't been to Google Earth for a while, then I think it's a great time to be thinking about what Google Earth would be. And so if we go to Google Earth, first of all, the thing I love about Google Earth is it's now online. If you didn't know that, it no longer is a downloadable app that you have to have on your computer. So you can just go to earth.google.com or google.com/earth. And one of the cool things they've done in Google Earth recently is over here on the left, you will see an icon. And I don't know if you can see this on your screen, but it looks like a ship's wheel. And it's called Voyagers. And when you click on Voyagers, it actually has all of these, think of them as mapping stories. These are digital mapping stories where students can learn, and it actually flies them around the world. And there are different, so if you're a social studies teacher, if I go under layers, they have layers of old historical maps that students can lay over. Here's historical maps from around the world. Science teachers, you will see that they've got all kinds of up-to-the-date sea temperature, seafloor ages, just some incredible, incredible stuff under layers that will layer this on top of Google Earth. Clear over here to the right, you will see an educational system section that these are, again, mapping stories that are tied to Common Core standards, but use Google Earth to teach students about those stories. So again, some amazing opportunities here. The other really nice one that I like is the one called Games. If I click on Games, there are all kinds of games here, including, and one of my favorite as a kid was Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego? You can now play Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego right inside Google Earth. Now, on an advanced level, over here to the left, they've also just launched projects. And projects are where students get to create those Voyagers. So students can now create their own digital stories, digital mapping stories right inside Google Earth. So another just amazingly great tool for students to be able to use. So I don't want us to forget about something like Google Earth. And as we get ready to wrap up here, here's what I want us to understand is doing nothing, right? Not doing anything is far worse than trying to do something. We have to try and do something for our kids. We have to try and do something for our parents. Is it going to be perfect? No. Our systems were never created for this type of learning, but we need to try and do something. And that is what I hope over these next few weeks as we get ramped up and get going on this, that you're trying something. Understand that we need to be there for our kids. We need to be there for our communities. We need to be there for our families. So we have to try and do something. And I want you to keep thinking about, what if the world was my curriculum? What is it that we can take that is around us? What can we take that we know that we can assume are in houses and have students create something around this? I don't want students just consuming information. I want them to create, right? Because the world belongs to those that create, not those that consume. So how are we having kids create forts and create science experiments and create? That needs to be one of our focuses in this as well. The last couple slides for you are links that you can go to, and you can come back and look at this. There's one I want to show you, but a couple things real quick. These two from the Thinking Stick, that is my blog. Those are two of the blog posts that I've written that cover a lot of the information that we're talking about here. My podcast is we podcast every week, and you'll find a lot more information around virtual school. You'll get to hear from other teachers around the state of Washington and what they are doing. The two underneath that is, one of these here is a PDF of a peer-reviewed article that I wrote about a year ago around this idea of connectivism, which is a learning theory that supports distance learning, this kind of learning. The one here from Vanderbilt is all about effective educational videos. What do we know a good effective educational video needs to be? For example, it should be between 3 and 5 minutes long. And then there's two more down here. There's the daily STEM resources, which are just some great resources. Again, would be some offline resources that you might be able to support families. The really nice thing about dailystem.com, these resources are both in English and Spanish for some of our Spanish speaking families and students. And the one down here at the very bottom is the University of Maryland has a bunch of resources that they've put together as well. But the one up here at the top, I think, becomes our most critical. And this is the hashtag virtual learning on Twitter. And if I click on this, I'm going to get out of my full screen mode again. And when I click on this, it's actually going to take me to Twitter, where I've already set up that link to do a search for virtual learning. Now, we know that there are about 1.1 million teachers on Twitter, and you do not need to have a Twitter account in order to do this, because all of this is being shared in the public. But if I actually click on that link and it takes me to virtual learning, then all I have to do is, after this, I could say fourth grade, right? Or I might just say fourth. And you're going to get resources that fourth grade teachers, you can see what are other fourth grade teachers doing in this same exact situation that you're in. What kind of things are they working on? Or maybe I'm just going to put in here science, right? What are other science things that other teachers are using, or how are they setting up and structuring this? Maybe I'm a music teacher, and so I'm just going to type in like, I'm having a hard time thinking about what's happening with music. And so if you just hashtag virtual learning, type in the word music, and you're going to get all kinds of things that students or that other teachers are sharing that they are doing with their students in the same situation that you are in. Please be a connected educator. And being a connected educator means using these places that connected educators hang out, such as Twitter. So the other two here, the last two slides, are things that have come out. These actually came out from a friend and a tech coach out of Hood River, Oregon, where they're just looking at some of the structures of a digital video mini lesson. So if you're making those using Screencastify, just some of the things that you might want to, just kind of a template, if you will, for making those videos for students. And then also, what does a remote learning lesson design look like? What that might look like for you. So just some other options there as well. So with that, I'm going to stop, and Ron, I will allow you to ask some questions, and maybe I can clarify some things.
All right, we're back. Let's try cameras again. Let's see if we can engage that way. It looked like our speeds were really good after you stopped your cam, but we'll try it this way. So we have a lot of Q&As, just to almost 700 people watching, and we had a lot of question and answers, and a lot of those we're gonna address in our trainings this week. Likewise, what we're gonna do is we'll build the answers to these. We'll put them in an FAQ. We'll make sure everybody can see them. So those that we don't ask Jeff right here, we can get an answer for you, because many of them are around the tool or around some specifics for Wenatchee School District. But there's some pretty good questions in here for you, Jeff, and I'd like you to chime in. One of them kind of revolves around special ed, additional support, intervention, title, LAP, accessibility issues. So can you kind of explain, kind of wrap around, what do we do for IEP kids? What do we do in the terms of intervention? Should they have their own Google Classroom? Should they try to work with the teams and do that method? What's your current best thinking around those students that need that additional time and support?
Yeah, we're seeing school districts come at this in a couple of different ways. And a lot of it has to do with the way that your system might have been set up before we found ourselves in this crisis. So for example, if you already had a special or a paraeducator that was supporting a child and they were already part of your Google Classroom, they should be included in that and go through it way. The other thing that we are seeing is special ed teachers being able to follow up personally with the students that they support. And so that they're reaching out to parents via email, or they're reaching out to the parents via a phone call in order to support those parents with those children at home. I would say one of the things that becomes critical is if I'm having, and I'm just going to, for example, I was a fourth grade teacher. So if my fourth grade team was getting together and we're having our virtual fourth grade team hangout meeting, I would make sure that the special ed teachers were involved in that meeting as well, or whoever the people are that are supporting my students. We would make sure that we are meeting those needs and we are adjusting the instruction to meet the needs of those kids. So if we have students who are on 504 plans, or we have then we're making accommodations for those kids, or we have kids who are special ed and we're making accommodations for those students, whoever is helping to support the teacher in that needs to be included in those planning meetings so that they can help to adjust the expectations for some of those students. As far as not having access to devices, I think that was was that one of the questions, like the idea of equitability, or the idea of
Yeah,
accessibility?
that and accessibility in terms of screen readers, consciousness to those type of accessibility issues for our handicapped students.
Yeah, and I would say anything like that we were already using, or find it. So there are some things that I think are critical, and I don't know what teachers were using before, but I'll just show you. For example, if I go back into presentation mode here inside of a Google slide, in Google Slides, if I click on caption down here at the bottom, it will actually now do live caption in real time. And I'll move this to the bottom of my screen. And so you could, as a teacher, you could be doing a presentation in Google Slides, and it will, in real time, be doing closed captions for students to read with you. Right? This is already built into Google Slides. So that, to me, is something that you might want to consider. Now, it doesn't translate in real time. That would be the next step. That I could be talking in English and it would translate it into Spanish. But that's just a click of a button. It's called the closed caption button. You can do that in your trainings this week, and learn some of that stuff around Google Drive. But then there's also one of the things that and I don't know if teachers were taking advantage of this before we went into distance learning. But if I am just, say I'm in a Google Doc and I have students who are struggling let me open the new doc here. Right. Inside of a Google Doc, there are two ways that I've seen teachers support kids with this. If I'm just inside of a Google Doc, and I don't know if this is going to work because my audio is being used by our YouTube stream here, but under tools, I have the idea under tools, you can see voice typing. So if I have students who aren't very good at being able to write or have some kind of writing accommodation, this might be some way that they can still get their writing done. Is all I have to do is talk, period, new paragraph, and it will actually type for me. So this is another accommodation that we use a lot with students. I know there were a lot of schools and a lot of teachers that were already using this. So again, it's there for you. And if I just stop this real quick, the other thing that is in here that I've seen teachers use is this idea for under tools as well, you'll see translate this document. So maybe I'm going to write my directions in English, but then I click on translate document, and I can choose, and let's say I'm going to translate this into Spanish. And of course, it's not going to be perfect, but what I have heard from, Spanish, but what I've heard from both teachers and parents who speak Spanish is they would rather have it close than perfect. So by click of a button, I could send out my instructions in English. I click translate. No, it's not perfect, but it's close enough that parents are understanding what are the directions they need to support their children at home as well. So there are a lot of accommodation features that are built into these tools that we can take advantage of in this time as well.
Great, awesome information, Jeff. When we get into this week is really focused on those routines and the systems for those routines. We'll get into some docs training, some drive training, and we're going to continue week by week with trainings that highlight some of those tools that you've talked about today.
Awesome.
I do want to give you a break. You've been talking for an hour. And we do have a lot of questions that came in through the chat. And by no means are we stopping this. Jeff has agreed graciously to hang on for about a half an hour, but I think we should take a little break. We've all been, in this virtual world, it's a little different. So you don't want to walk away and miss something. So let's take a 5-minute break. Let's give everybody a chance to get some coffee and some water and use the restroom. Let's come back. And Jeff will do about another half hour. That way he can look at the chat when he comes back and we can find out these questions. I'm going to share a doc with him where we've been putting questions for Jeff. And again, we have a lot of questions good for everyone, and we have a lot of questions that are app specific that we will come back to when we start doing these individual trainings throughout this week. So let's do a 5-minute break and we'll be back. So it's 10:20 right now, 10:19-ish, so about 10:25.
Awesome.
And Jeff, I'll share this doc with you right now, just so when you come back, the things that are green we feel are good for the entire group.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
It's okay if you take a break. You have 3 more minutes.
I'm just reading through the questions here real quick. So
As you read some of those ones that are good for everybody in terms of your content, I'm going to answer a couple that were good for our district that you wouldn't know the answer to. So
okay.
I had a lot of questions about just connectivity and internet for kids. We're trying to do our best to facilitate that at the local level, working with some companies. We have some meetings around internet and connection within Wenatchee with some local leaders and some local internet service providers to try to facilitate that. We do have a partnership with Quada. We have 100-ish Wi-Fi hotspots that we're going to be able to check out to the most needy families potentially. But as everything else with virtual learning, what we have found out, webcams, you can't get any. Hotspots, you can't get any. Because guess what? Everybody in the world is trying to do virtual learning right now. So it is not as it's not as easy as buying a hotspot because
Yeah.
there aren't any hotspots. So we're doing our best. We're going to hand out Chromebooks this week on Wednesday night and Thursday night, and get devices in kids' hand, and then facilitate as best we can the internet to those households. So that's one thing. Had a few questions on, do I switch to Dojo if I'm using Classroom? No, absolutely not. Stay with what you're using, stay with what's working, stay with what you think is age appropriate. We are just going to have to choose certain apps to train on and us to become experts on so that we can support effectively. So there might very well be some apps that you're comfortable with, your kids are comfortable with, they came from your classroom using it. Continue using those. Just it's really more about the structure and the timing of things, as Jeff mentioned with his schedule in terms of office hours or posting of assignments and communications. And then there was several questions on guardian emails in classroom. That will be part of our training today. But when you add a parent email address to classroom, any classroom that student is enrolled in automatically gets those notifications. So a parent gets an email right off the bat saying, do you want a daily, weekly, or a different kind of digest? But then every classroom that student's in, because they all have the same email account, um, they get those notifications. So it's a one and done. So it's a student level notification, not a classroom level notification. All right, so Jeff, you saw some of those ones in green there. If you want to chime in on any of the or any of them, we just tried to parse out some ones that we thought were really kind of pertaining to your content. And actually, before people start tuning off, if they don't want to stick around for Q&A, can we give Jeff virtual applause? Fantastic session today. We hope to have a continuing relationship with you over the next few months and into the future. So I think kudos to you, great information, and we will do our best to facilitate keeping that information getting to the teacher's hands. Cool. So well, fire away at some of those questions. If you want me, I think you're reading them, so you can kind of facilitate how you might best answer those.
All right, so I'm going to look at a couple of these here and see if I can maybe answer some of these. So one of the first ones I'm looking at here is how does intervention fit in? I think we kind of talked about that. If I'm a reading specialist and I work with struggling readers, again, I think any way that you can, especially if you are working with struggling readers, there might be times that you need to set up a Google Meet with those students if you can. Or support parents. What kind of activities can you be giving to parents to support those struggling readers? I think and it depends again on the age of the children, but some of this we're going to have to lean on parents to do some of this support work at home because they are there physically with the child, right? So be thinking about what strategies can we share, simple, basic strategies that we can share with parents. Another thing that I have seen, if you're, for example, let's say you're a reading specialist and you're working on comprehension skills with students, that after the student reads a story or something, that the parent interviews them and they use Screencastify, or the student makes a video talking about chapter 3 that they just finished, right? So again, think about video because you get to hear voice. Voice is critical with that, but also be thinking about how do parents play a role in this, and it's where we're at. Where parents are going to have to play a role, especially when we're talking about some of our struggling readers and our kids with some of the highest needs. We will need to coordinate with other grade levels so that they are not getting too many lessons a day, and I agree with that. And that's one of the reasons why we want to kind of create a schedule so that we're not overloading students. So for example, I am working with Ording School District, and Ording's schedule is very much like the one that I shared with you in the presentation. The one thing that they did add is that, and again, this was a high school. This is a high school schedule coming together. And the high school, one of the things that wasn't in my schedule was world languages. So what they decided to do is they added world languages to Tuesdays and Wednesdays, so that Tuesday would be a little bit for students. So students, excuse me, on Tuesday would have ELA, science, and world languages. And on Wednesday, they'd have math, social studies, and world languages. So then both the math, so then the other ones know that there's going to be less time spent on their subject because we're picking up world languages on those days. And again, that's a conversation to have at your school based on the schedule, right? Because my schedule was just kind of to get you to think differently. Your school will have to come up with what does that schedule look like? Should special education teachers set up a Google Classroom with all of their students on their caseload? Totally up to you. If you already had something like that set up before you went into this, I would say, yes, use it. I think depending on what your caseload is, how many kids you had, then you might even be holding your own office hours to reach those kids. If you were spending a lot of time with students and you wanted to check in with them, and again, building those relationships, that's what those office hours are for. I think that is a fantastic idea that you can do. Do you need to set up your own Google Classroom? No, maybe you're just going to make sure that you're reaching out to all of the teachers that you have kiddos who you support in, and making sure that you're on those team meetings, so that when the science department at the high school is having a team meeting, that one of the special ed teachers who has kiddos in there, or maybe there's a teacher in the science department, that their role is to reach out to the special ed teachers and make sure that we're accommodating correctly for those students that have that. So different ways you can do that. Does your office hour have to be over video? For example, the teacher could be on video, but students could type questions in Google Classroom. So what I would suggest is I would suggest that you're be in the same spot. So I think that video is important because there is a connection through video that we don't get other ways. So I would say video is critical. If kids don't want to be on video, every video app, much like we're using here, has a chat feature. So I wouldn't have kids go to another place like Google Classroom to ask their questions. I would have them in the chat. So Google Meets has a chat. So kids can be in the chat room asking questions back and forth, asking questions. If they don't want to turn on their video, they don't have to. Or they can just have their audio and not turn their video on. So the nice thing about something like Google Meets, or like we're using here, as you saw, my bandwidth started to go down. I just turned off my video and you just got to hear my voice. There's a lot of different ways that students can access this. And hang on a sec, I'm having a cat issue. There's a lot of problems with home learning. You get cats in the way. All right. So be thinking about that, right? It doesn't have to be video, but set up whatever that system is, allow students the opportunity. Do they want to chat to their teacher? Do they want video to their teacher? Do they want audio to their teacher? And kids get to choose based off their comfort level. I saw there was another one along those same lines that somebody was reading, where students over video were highlighting differences between students' home circumstances. So one of the cool things is many of the apps allow you to do a virtual background like you see behind me, or students go somewhere in their house that they make sure that the lighting is correct. And that is a situation, but I have not heard any stories where students are judging students based on what they're seeing behind that student. Now that's for me. I'm not saying that hasn't happened, but I haven't heard any stories where that has been an issue, and maybe it would be, but I have not heard any stories with the districts that I'm working with.
I'll interject one thing in there, Jeff, just so people know that the app we're using is Zoom currently. You've seen a lot of things in the news about Zoom and Zoom hacking. It hasn't really been hacking. You don't want to post your URLs to your meetings in a public forum. Don't put them on Twitter and don't put them on Facebook, because then random people might join, which could be a problem. So we will, Zoom's a tool that has a lot more bells and whistles. It has a lot more features. We do have the ability to get some licensing for Zoom for staff. So down the road, a couple weeks, we'll probably introduce, for those ready to benefit, a potential use of Zoom in addition to Meet. But we think Meet is a fine tool to start with, and it'll get you going, and has most things you would need besides some bells and whistles, like the Eastern Eagles background, of course, or the Wenatchee Valley background that Jeff's using. So we'll get there. This is a long journey, and the silver lining to all this, we're going to get really good at using these tools and hopefully continue their use in the future too. Jeff's got a few more questions on here, so I'll let him keep going.
Awesome. So I like this one. This is a good question. The idea that it says, please address what elementary specialists who have 400 plus students need to do to make this work. It will need to look a bit different. And you're right, it will look a bit different. So what are ways that we can think differently about it? And this might be one of those opportunities, or this might be one of those things where it's going to be that parents signed off that you practiced your instrument for 30 minutes, 3 times a week. Or if I'm a PE teacher, I'd be trying to think of, like, what are games that families can play? Is there some game that is still working on the skills, getting people physically active, that maybe are games from around the world that you want kids to go out and play as a family? Or is it just, go out and run? Now, depending on that level, if I'm talking kindergarten, first and second grade, it's probably going to be a lot of family type of game kind of situations. If I'm talking third, fourth, fifth, sixth grade, I might be setting up something like I showed with that Google sheet, where kids are coming in and they are tracking themselves. You're not tracking it. You're going to have 400 kids in there, and they can go in and track and say, I ran 4 hours today. I ran, uh, a mile. I don't know what it is. I did 15 push-ups, whatever it is you might be working on. How are kids going to track themselves? The hard part with that is having the idea that any kid can just tell you they did it without actually doing it. So again, not every day, not all the time, but I'd be thinking about using video, right? Maybe kids are going to video doing push-ups or doing sit-ups. And we're not talking long videos. We're talking, you want videos of 30 seconds, right? So again, we're going to have to think differently when you have 400 plus students and what that looks like. And what are some of the ways that we can think about what might a student have in the house that allows them to continue to be physically active, to play music, to do art projects, or whatever that specialist that you have. So that's a really good question. And you're right. We're going to have to think differently about that. So how do we, I like this one too. So then how do we extend this to those kiddos who still don't have access online? We will still have those kiddos, probably the ones we need to reach the most. And that becomes a critical point, right? Is a lot of times the students who aren't connected or who don't pick up a Chromebook when the school passes it out are some of our kids that we probably need the most support. And that is where I like doing things like choice boards. I like doing things where we are giving families choices to do things. We are supporting families in doing things. But at the end of the day, and this is one of the things that in my latest blog post that I wrote about, the idea that there was already inequity in our system before we went to virtual school. Inequity in parent support at home, inequity in what students were going home to, inequity in food, right? We already had these inequities. So not doing it, don't be using equity as a lens to not do anything. It's a lens we have to look through, and we have to do the best we can with what we have. What are things that we can do to support those kids? I've got school districts who are dropping off packets to those students of choice boards. I have schools who are dropping off supplies to family, pencils, papers, crayons. And from a district level, we're going to have to identify those students and support them the best we can through this. But I don't want us to get hung up in that we have one or two students that aren't going to be able to do this, so we don't do anything. That to me is the wrong place that we need to be in, right? These inequities were always there. They're now just, they're different, and they're shining a light on it, and we can figure them out. We can figure out how to support these kiddos and these families. And it's going to look different for those in our most needy, but trying to set up those systems. And again, different districts are doing this different ways. Much like food, that was the first thing the districts really had to do, is how do we get food out to students? And so the same kind of idea will come as we go through this as well. All right. Jeff mentioned his wife is a school counselor. Does he have any suggestions for school counselors in this format? Yes, school counselors. This is all about digital citizenship. All right. So how are we taking those things? And I'm just, my wife and I have talked a lot about this, and the idea of, when we talk about, especially from a school counselor, right, we're talking about being respectful, being a good friend. Are we creating some kind of system to help show kids what does that look like in a virtual sense? What does it look like to be a good friend in a virtual situation? What does it look like to show respect in a chat room? And one of the places we can go for this and for counselors is commonsensemedia.org, which was already the digital citizenship stuff that we were doing with students, but be thinking about, how am I using those same things, right? Whatever you were teaching as a counselor, can we help support that by counselors making short videos, 3 to 5 minute videos that you could send the link to teachers. Teachers can put that link to the video inside their Google Classroom so kids can access it. And maybe the counselor is teaching a mini lesson on, what does friendship look like in a virtual sense? How do you make sure that your friends are having their needs met? As a counselor, maybe you're holding an office hour with different classes. Maybe you're going to join the teacher on an office hour. So if I'm a 4th grade teacher and an elementary school counselor, not every single time, but every other week, maybe the school counselor is going to join my office hour and be there to support kiddos as well. And just to be that face that you always were in the school. So again, I think we can think of some different ways to do this. What weekly schedule have you seen works best for K2? So for K2, It is a weekly schedule where every day we focus on one aspect, one um, one standard, one thing we want kids to do. It's got to be short. At K2, what we're aiming for at K2 is somewhere between 45 minutes, 30 minutes to 45 minutes of actively engaged time, right? By late elementary school, fifth grade, sixth grade, and then middle school and high school, we're looking at 3 hours a day. That is the goal, is to get 3 hours of work out of students. We are not going to see students put in 7 or 8 hours plus 2 hours of homework like they were in a real school situation. It's just not working. So our goal is trying to, at the middle school, high school level, trying to get 3 hours out of students. Late elementary school, maybe 2 hours, right? And as schools, we can talk about this, but this is what most schools I'm working with are aiming for: 3 hours at middle school, high school, about 2 hours of work for late elementary, and then you start scaffolding that down. So kindergarten, we're looking at maybe a half hour, 45 minutes. Again, it depends on how much support you're getting from your parents in that situation and you were before. Are they building puzzles? Are we doing art projects? What kind of things can we support families with at home? But when we're talking about the kind of stuff that we want them to do, we're looking at activities that maybe, if Monday is reading and writing, 30-minute activity, right? Tuesday, 30-minute activity on math. That's what we'd be aiming for at, I would say, at like a kindergarten level. Let's see. How can we protect against the accidental or intentional misuse during live use of device cameras and microphones? Example, inappropriate ambient audio or field of view. Yeah. Again, I think one of the first things that when you hold your first your first office hour, I almost said happy hour, first office hour, when you hold your first office hour, to review those rules, right? You have rules of your classroom. How do we respect each other in the classroom is the same of how do we respect each other in our virtual classroom as well. One of the nice things in Google Meets too is if you start the meeting, so I start the meeting, I have control over being able to mute people, and so be thinking about that as well. So you have some control as a teacher that you can mute kids, you can I'm not sure if you can shut off their video, but I know you can. I know you can mute them if kids are being inappropriate. But the first thing is to think about is to set up those routines. So, hey, the first time you have an office hour, it's like, hey, this is our first office hour. We're going to be doing these 2 times, 3 times a week, whatever it is for you. And here's how it works. When you're in a chat room, make sure you put an @ symbol next to somebody's name. That is how you chat to each other. Make sure that we're appropriate. We are still in school. We need to make sure that the school this is an appropriate setting. And you're going to, just like you would the first day of school, you're going to have to teach what does that look like for us in our now new continuum distance learning phase. How have you seen computer adaptive software work in the online learning setting? Alexa, Achieve 3000, iReady. Yep, all of those things being used by different teachers in different ways. I think what we're seeing is there were already a lot of different adaptive software that was out there. There was a lot of accommodations built into these softwares that we just weren't using, that we're seeing teachers really take advantage of and support. And again, Ron and your IT department can help you with those as well. And the last one I have here in green is, what other school districts is Jeff working with so I can connect with him for my special curriculum or specific curriculum? So Moses Lake, I'm working with Moses Lake School District right down the road from you. They're often rocking and rolling using a very same system like you are. Royal City will be just handed out all their Chromebooks, so they're just getting ready to get going. Enumclaw, I'm working with Enumclaw. They're a little bit ahead of you as well as far as being down the road. Them and Moses Lake, I think, are the farthest that I'm working with right now. Ordine School District is working with this as well. So those are school districts right now that I am doing very much the same type of work with as we're rolling out kind of this 3-week ramp up to learning. So to answer those questions, Ron, I'll turn it back over to you.
I'll chime in a couple comments here just to clarify. We've had a lot of comments around, what guidelines do we have in place for X, Y, or Z? And what we're going to do is do our best. We have a new staff intranet, so you should get the link to that from your administrators from one of your morning meetings, but it's also on the staff webpage right at the top. any staff webpage. So we're going to be putting all those resources onto there. We're going to try to build as many guidelines as we think we need. We want to allow, autonomy in the classroom, just like we did in our current system. But we also understand some people need some scaffolding. So we're going to put together some best practices. And please leverage our trainings. Ray and I are going to be training quite a bit the next few weeks. We're going to also invite some other experts from the classroom to come in and help us train in certain softwares. And we will try to do our best to not just be a tool training. These are going to be trainings around how can I use this? What can I do? How can I make this work? How can I make it clear to families and to kids how it's going to work? So these are not necessarily just where do I click? This is how do I use it as best we can and facilitate that process. So there's also a ton of resources out there that we're going to put on that intranet site for teachers, for parents, for kids, and also the public resources site we put together has a lot of stuff on it and a lot of links, and it can be very overwhelming. That's why we want to focus on some of those basic tools that we think everybody needs to nail. And then we move forward, and as people are ready to benefit, we'll put in more trainings, we'll put in more guidelines, we'll put in more information for you, because it can be very overwhelming very quickly because if you haven't lived in this world.
Yeah. And I think the other thing we have to start preparing ourselves for is we know that the governor just extended this till May 4th. And we know that pretty good chance schools are going to go that. And if you haven't heard already, there's talk that we might be going through the end of the school year. So we have to be thinking long-term. So I like your approach, Ron, of start simple, start with these tools, get the foundation of these tools set, and then we will continue, we can continue down that road. There's a couple other questions that just came through that I wanted to answer real quick. One of them was Caitlin asked about copyright issues. And that is something we have to be concerned about, but also know there is a list of authors of student books who have already signed to allow teachers to read the book over video to their class. So you can't post it on YouTube, but you can read the book and post it in your classroom. So if you still want to have reading time with your kids, there are authors who have signed a waiver that allow teachers to do that. So you can find that list on the internet. I don't have it handy with me. If you need support, I can support that with Ron. We can find that for you.
Likewise, one point on that, Jeff, is we're in a YouTube live session here, which is totally open, obviously, or if it's a private link. But remember, Google Meet, you cannot join a Google Meet unless you're from within our organization. So even there's ways of sharing a stream so you don't have interaction, which we're going to train on tomorrow in our Meet trainings. But know that those aren't public. Nobody can just jump on a Google Meet. They have to be part of WenatcheeSchools.org to join our Google Meet sessions. So there is some privacy there, even though we still have to be concerned. It's a great reinforcement of fair use and really using information appropriately. And we should be doing that anyway, but now there's going to be a bigger lens since everything is online and you could get into trouble. So be careful if you're doing anything outside that's open to the world.
Yeah, I like that. Emily asked a good question that she said, the day we cancel school was supposed to be the first day to see our new kiddos. Would you encourage us to work with the new class? And the answer is yes, we've got to keep going. But what it might be is the first video you post to your new class is going to be all about you, talking about your experience. I'm just thinking if it was me and it was the first time I was seeing these kiddos, man, I would be talking about I personally, I'd be taking them on a tour of my house, and this is my office, and I'm so excited for you to be here and spend this trimester with you. But we do have to keep learning going forward. So I think that is a critical piece to this too. Teresa has a really good point. She said, I planned on using the same expectations plus a few more for online situations my students and I came up with when we started our SEL morning meetings. And I think that is fantastic. I know teachers, two things that we've seen is maybe start a Google Doc where it's like rules to a virtual classroom and even allow kids access that virtual doc. So kids are part of making the rules just like they were in your physical classroom. What are the rules that we can agree on? What does that look like for us? How do we treat each other with respect? What does respect look like online? You think of all these things that we now get to teach kids. It's going to be amazing because of this new situation we're in. And I just love that idea of thinking different and using what we were already doing in new and different ways.
I think this is a self-answering question, but I I saw one pop in a little bit earlier that I didn't color for you, but should part of our curriculum be teaching students how to use the tools we want them to use? And I think it's an obvious yes, but how much of that, how much time do you spend trying to scaffold for kids where you can't meet with them and teach them how to use Flipgrid or use Screencastify, or what other sources do you point them to?
Yeah. And so that is where video instruction plays a critical role. So you as a teacher, I mean, one of my favorite things to use is Screencastify. And if you've never used Screencastify, teachers, I would say this week, really focus in on that, because Screencastify allows you to do very much like you've been seeing me do here, where you could see my screen, you could see my presentation, but have my face in the corner. And so using Screencastify, you can do that exact same thing. The great thing about Screencastify is it automatically uploads it to your Google Drive, and it has a one-click button, share to your Google Classroom. So you're going to need to scaffold some of this for your students. So you can make Screencastifys teaching kids how to go to Google Earth. You can create a Screencastify teaching kids how to load Screencastify. All right. Like, we're going to have to do video instruction, and video instruction outside of distance learning was the number one thing that was actually showing an increase of student learning in the classroom before we went here. When I was doing trainings with school districts before we got here, we focused on Screencastify already, because the research is showing that using video for instructional purposes is actually increasing student learning. And the research also found that if the teacher makes the video for those kids, the learning increases even more, because it's about relationship. And the reason why video is so great, and the whole other presentation about this generation, that's a different time. But why video is so great is kids get control over the pace and path. When you are teaching in the classroom, and I am talking right now, I control the pace. But in a video, if I make a video instruction through Screencastify, students can pause me. Students can rewatch me 3 million times if they want to. That's the power of video, is you have given control of the pace of learning over to students. That's the power. So after this is all done, know that that is still the most powerful thing that we can do, that is actually showing an increase in student learning to this generation. So get used to making instructional videos through something like Screencastify. It is such a powerful tool, both in a distance learning situation and when we return to physical schools as well.
Tomorrow at 11, tune in for training in Screencastify. It's on your calendar. Hopefully you tune in. I'm rethinking how we're going to do our trainings, and we might end up in YouTube Live. I think this has been I think it's a pretty engaging way to do it, compared to potentially doing a Meet stream.
Yeah. No, they're pretty cool. They're fun to set up, and you can get a lot of people in here.
So unless you see other things in there that have been popped in, Jeff, that are good for everyone, again, just to reiterate, we're going to post all these so that everybody has access to what our answers are to a lot of the questions that maybe weren't asked. And also the recording will be posted. Everything will be posted in our asynchronous training site. So after every training throughout this week and beyond, we're going to be posting those on the intranet, which will require your Google login, but those will be posted online. And so you can refer back to any of those recordings, and if there's any artifacts that go with that, like the chat transcript or the question and answer doc that we created on the fly. So Jeff, if you want to give some final words, I think we're kind of down to the end, and we've asked a lot of time of you and a lot of effort. So we are extremely grateful. I've seen nothing but positive comments for you and your information, and a de-stressor. So
Yeah.
Just know that our teachers are very, very grateful and happy that you could help us out today.
Yeah. And thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate, I don't get to go to Wenatchee nearly enough. So it was really cool that I get to, stand up on the hill here with the Columbia River behind me, and be there with you today. But, I think as we venture into this, go slow, take it slow for your kiddos, take it slow for yourself. Make sure you're taking care of yourself. Take care of each other as teams. You can't stress that enough. The school districts and even the international schools that are having the most success, where school districts and schools who set up those teams, who spent time together to support each other through this. It's not going to be perfect, nor should it be perfect. We were not built for this, but we've got to do something for our kiddos. And if you can get out of the negative headspace, I think that to me is my biggest fear, is that teachers get so of things we can't do, then we make the mistake of going down a really negative rabbit hole, instead of think of the possibilities that we can now do. And what does that mean? Different. And I just love this idea of, it's the first time in a really long time that we haven't been tied to a curriculum per se. We don't have a state test. They canceled it. You are free. You are free to do what you want to do with your kiddos, as long as they're still tied to state standard. We've always had standards, they've been around forever. But think about possibilities that have been given to us. And it's not going to be perfect, but in an incredible time happen. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. Know that I'm here to support you. I'm in touch on and everybody there, and so hopefully we'll see you again.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Have a great afternoon and be safe yourself.
Thanks.